Hello, everyone, and it's nice to introduce to you John Pick, one of our guest speakers. And John has very kindly come along to offer a perspective from an SME point of view. John is someone who has entered into sort of SME life after being part of a big corporate. He decided to give up that in 2003. And in the last 15 years has been running his own businesses. So John, thank you very much for coming along and giving us this short talk. I'm sure everyone will be interested in hearing some of your experiences and examples of the challenges that you've had in terms of managing change.
Okay, thank you, Julie. I hope I don't disappoint. So the question you have to ask yourself for change from an SME perspective is change friend or foe? I think you've got to look in terms of a large organisation achieves its efficiency through its scale and systems. You build up the infrastructure of a large organisation, and it's the blend of people, processes and resources, and there's a lot more of all of those. And it means that these large organisations can tackle the things that just small companies can't. Finance particularly being a major issue. But how do they react to change when it hits them? And I think I would always say to people, well, ask the electronic typewriter manufacturers how they coped with change. They didn't. They became dinosaurs, and they lost out totally. So you've got to be able to react to that change. And I think even if you see change coming in the bigger organisations, in spite of somebody having that vision and can see it coming, it's ever so hard for them to influence that change to make sure that the organisation can cope. An SME needs less help, persuasion. There's less levels within the organisation to adapt to new conditions. So I think as things happen, it allows it to just be so much more reactive. I've worked in run a number of smaller organisations involved in both in the service industry, manufacturing and research. So it's been quite interesting. How do we cope with the external changes that get thrown at us? The things I would say is that it's the different types of changes can be really difficult. The first one I'll sort of cover is slow changes, because for an SME, you don't tend to spend a lot of time looking out and things just start moving in the wrong direction. You get that nagging feeling that things are going to start to affect you in a negative way. So the area that I had this in, which was one of the businesses, which was a service and repair garage, standard garage that you take your car to. So what was the creeping change that was coming in? Cars are getting more complicated. They're becoming more reliable. When we started running the business in 2006, we used to see 3-year-old cars all the time. But then as the cars have become more complicated, then you've needed more equipment and more knowledge on how to repair them. So how do you cope with that? Certainly back in 2006, we had no electric vehicles and no hybrids. So with those, there's even less to do with normal cars. So that change is then starting to push in on our industry. So is that change a friend or foe? How do we cope with it? This is still going to be a competitive industry no matter what happens. So what are your competitors doing? How is the other local garages treating this creeping change? Now, you sort of think mechanics tend to be sort of the less intellectual, if you like, but have they grasped the significance of this? And the people who are successful in their garage businesses, have they made the best of it? Do they read and understand the research? Because we've sat down and said we need to restructure the business and where we get our business from, because the traditional areas just aren't going to be there. So we have to meet head on. Technology, how do you cope with the electric vehicles and the hybrids? You can't do a lot to them, but you can still do something. So make yourself ready. What we've also done is to say, well, as things change, who is going to be bringing you work? So we've restructured our business so that we're more focused on customers, business customers, and particularly the delivery vans and drivers, the small fleets, and how, what do they need? They need vehicles that are always being serviced and reactive along the way. So we've changed our service provision, and a lot of our competitors in the area just haven't done anything. They've stayed in their traditional markets and hoping that it'll stay the same, if indeed they've noticed. So in that change, whilst it's a foe, the change that's being put upon us, the way that we react to it and the way that we use our skills within the company, who knows something about electric vehicles, who knows something about vans, the way we use those skills has then helped us to make the changes. And so the change has been our friend. I think an example from my experience of the fast change, that can be very difficult for SME, because it can sweep you off your feet. You need good people, obviously. They have to be able to see and understand the new needs. But then again, as a lot of them are closer to the delivery than the delivery part of the operation, it's almost easier. So you have to have a reactive culture. You just got to be a bit careful though, because as often when you do your strengths and weaknesses analysis, being reactive is good, but also being reactive can be bad because people run off and do things in advance of something that then doesn't actually happen. So it's has to be a balanced. And again, you have, being a small team though, you can see things happening, but you do get a bit of waste as a result of it. To give you some idea where we had a sort of a fast change, we were manufacturing, in the manufacturing sector, we'd got somebody who a large service organisation which needed help with trailers. Now, they'd got 5 months and they needed some trailers, but they didn't know how many. The only thing they did know was they'd got a set start date. They had to get going and have these trailers to do a job of work. They'd approached everybody who made trailers and they'd all said, we need 12 months. And so they were stuck. And you're thinking, well, how does a large organization get itself in this mess? This was a big service organization. They'd bid this work, they'd won the contract, and now they couldn't deliver on it. So they obviously hadn't done some of their homework. We were in a position where we would just happen to be helping them out on another aspect of the service delivery. We'd got no manufacturing facilities sizable enough to do the job. We didn't even make trailers, but we could design something. So as a small organization, we had to cope with the change because here was a project, it needed doing, a customer that was desperate. How could they help? And what do? You ring round your friends and associates. You ring round everyone you know and find out who can help. And again, this is where an SME perspective helps. People necessarily, and you can contact them. You don't need to go through a long engagement process where you send out people to assess the organization, their financial viability or whatever. They're there, you need them, you use them. So we pulled in short-term resource, people that we know. Again, we need someone to help us do this, so pull the people in. Now, it's still a rough ride because we were trying to do an awful lot in a short space of time, and trust was the real concern. And what was interesting was that in the project, the two people who let us down most were the ones that you would have thought were your friends, and they wouldn't have let you down. And part of that is they decided to introduce their own changes. And again, this is back to the bit of the reactivity. They thought it was a good idea to go and do something, and the reality was we didn't know about it. And when we found out about it, it wasn't a good idea, and we had to reverse those decisions on one case, and on the other case, they were supposed to supply, and they decided we're going to deliver after the end date. And you have to cope with that change. So what did we do in those positions? We had to find alternatives. So it's back on the phones. Let's go and find someone. There's another change come through. So, and I think this is where you just have to be resilient. The culture that you have to have is a certain level of resilience to cope with anything that gets thrown at you, because the deadline just wasn't going away. So that's one of the issues that we had. The other one that we had was the customer decided to change how many trailers they did want. First of all, they didn't know, so we had to help them work out how many they thought they might need, and they doubled the amount. So here we are with supply problems. They change their order, which doubles the problem. But again, in the end, you work it out. We delivered in time, and the customer at that stage had actually started to realise they didn't want trailers anyway. It wasn't a solution they could work with. But you do your job and you get on with it. So I think the fast change is quite exciting. I think that's the one thing. You were living on your wits, but I was personally, it was very hard work, because you're constantly trying to balance what they want with what you can deliver. You're also trying to balance the money, and that's the other thing. You don't have that pool of resource and finance that you can then tap into. Yes, you may have to go and plead and beg for budget, but with us, if you're pleading and begging, it's with the bank or something like that, or the customer to make an early payment. That's the only way that you can do it. So change is hard, because you're dealing with it on a personal perspective as well as on a sort of financial and organisation perspective. So I would sort of say SMEs thrive on change because of what they can do. It's short term. It maybe require resilience, and I think you can get by with a lot less. It's a lot cheaper as well. But I think the thing to bear in mind with an SME, and you think of it as a small organisation, it isn't really a small organisation, because as we found on all of our projects, you need to find other people. So you may be part of a whole consortium, and that's, I think, where the SMEs operate well, in that they become part of a large organisation because through their contacts, associations, partners, people they work with, people who supply to them. You become part of a big organisation in a way, but one which has less embedded process and associations. So, Julie, I don't know, how does that sort of cover? Have you got anything that you'd like expanding a bit more?
Hello, John. Thank you very much for that. Very interesting indeed. And I've got one or two questions that I'd like you to sort of consider. You mentioned this issue of trust in changing situations. I mean, in terms of your experience of managing these networks, how did you kind of build this trust, particularly on the second example that you gave us, where it was really very short term? And you need to kind of get that trust very quickly.
Yeah, so I think those occasions, it was, you've got to know the people. And it's like any organisation, you've got to know who you're working with and how well you're working with them. And these were people who we worked with for a lot of years and knew them inside out. But what we didn't know was that their capacity to change things. And they would turn around. You decided, one example was the supplier who was making our prototype took the design, which was made in steel for a trailer, which is quite a normal way of doing things, and decided to make it out of aluminium. Now, we'd never asked them to do that, and they didn't tell us about it. So at that point, if you trust someone to just get on with a job and they don't, they do a different job, it's really hard. You then don't trust them any further. That's the one thing you do. You say, right, okay, you're not doing that anymore. But trust is just something people have got to do what they said they would do. And that's where you gain that level of understanding.
I think that would be a really interesting issue for many of the MBA students that are on this course, and this is a challenge I think I'll put out to them. The other thing that it seemed to come over, a theme that came out of what you were talking about, was this notion of agility in SMEs, the ability to change quickly. So how do you manage that particular process?
Well, there's no doubt with an SME, if you say, right, tomorrow we're going to make a different color trailer, you just order the paint and get on with it. it's as simple as that. Whereas if you're in a large organization, then everyone's got to go, well, why do we want to change the color? But if there's a good reason for doing it, the reactivity is you do it. But again, like any organization, you've still got to use the same sort of technique, as that everybody needs to know that the color of the trailer is changing. That's why there's red paint, not blue or whatever. So, but it's on a personal level, and the communication's so much quicker, because you almost stand at the one end of the workshop and say, tomorrow we're making red trailers, and everyone will know. So I think the communication lines are much quicker, so the ability to implement it becomes much faster. And I think the other thing is that you've got to bear in mind with a lot of big organizations is you get a bit of information overload, in that you get sort of 500 emails a day. How do you know which is the one that's important, that tells you tomorrow we're making blue trailers, not green or red? It's having the effective communication and being able to react. So I think that's really.
I guess I've just got one more question for you, which is intriguing me. Would you ever consider going back into a large corporation?
Only at the right level.
Do you ever regret making the decision to actually kind of build your own businesses and be independent?
No, I don't think anybody who does it would ever want to go back, literally, because you're still having to persuade people. I think this is the thing. When you work within an organization, within a structure, you have to influence everybody around you, or in your bubble, if you pardon the current word, because you have to influence up, you have to influence down, you have to influence sideways. When you're running your own business, you can decide, but you still have to persuade people, because part of the culture and the nature of the people is they're more reactive anyway. And when you say, well, we want to do this, they go, oh, well, why don't we do this as well? And that's the whole point. You then have to have a debate about how you do it. So it's interesting, but again, you still can hold sway, and you get the immediate feedback from it as well. In that once everybody's decided to do it, it happens. It's not a long lead time. So I think the only thing is, if you could take the financial worry away and you could just concentrate on the job, that'd be great. But inevitably, if you're running a small business, you're always worried about money, and you're always saying, well, how much is in the bank? And you log into the bank every day to have a look, see what's in there, see if you can carry on with whatever wonderful ideas and whatever change you want to implement. You've still got to have some cash there to pay the bills to help it happen as well.
That's very interesting. And thank you very much, John, because I think you've given us a really interesting insight into, some of the challenges facing SMEs. I guess it's going to be interesting for our MBA students to debate that, and perhaps even think about the transferability of some of the ideas that you've been putting forward. So on behalf of our Executive MBA, thank you very much for giving up your time, and hopefully give you some feedback when they've actually had a look at this video. Thank you, John.
Well, I welcome. They can always come and help anytime.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.